And I'm joined live from New York by Mark Meirowitz, who's a professor at the State University of New York Maritime College and a political commentator. Mark, thank you for joining us again today. It's interesting that we should be seeing the recording of the balcony speech from Ankara, because it was about 18 hours ago when we were last speaking, which was about the time that was actually happening. So we've come full circle, if you like. But first of all, I'd like to ask you, what is your impression of what you saw of the Turkish election yesterday from the United States?
Well, as an American, I would say a very interesting thing is that one of the newspapers in Turkey came out with a headline, Erdoğan kaybetti, Erdogan lost. And that reminded me of the famous incident in the election of President Harry Truman against Thomas Dewey, where all the newspapers were absolutely sure that Truman was going to lose, and they came out with the newspaper that said, Dewey defeats Truman. So this is a big impression on me that there seemed to have been some sort of a feeling here that President Erdogan would not be able to pull through. And not only did he pull through in terms of precipitating a runoff, but AK Party and MHP now have a majority in the parliament. So I think it is really a victory all around. I mean, even though it didn't get over the 50%, but Erdogan made 49.5%. He only needs another half point and a little bit to win the presidency. So like I say, perception is everything. And it also, my other impression is that you can believe some polls and you don't believe some others, but always believe in the people. And that's kind of what we were talking about previously. The people are the ones who make the decision, and this decision they made. So I think it's very impressive, and also that Turkey handled an election in what looks like a very fair way, fair election, and the people have spoken. And now they will have a chance on May 28th to speak again. But the way in which this worked out seems to presage and seems to indicate that looks like President Erdogan is close to a win, especially because you have that 5% with Sinan Oğan, and we're going to talk about that, I'm sure.
Indeed. Now, in terms of participation, I mean, this must be a shock for many people living outside of Turkey to look in and see 87, 85, 88% participation in election when many countries are used to much lower lessons. What does that say to you about the involvement in the democratic process here in Turkey?
I mean, it speaks to me in a very significant way. I mean, it indicates that the Turkish people took this election very seriously, and they realized how important it was. And they came out in large numbers to participate. And in many other countries, that's not the case, as you point out. Even in the United States and many other countries, our turnouts very often are very low. So I think it's a great commendation to the Turkish people. I have to say that about turnout, I saw on the web a 102-year-old lady coming to vote. I saw people who are disabled working their way to the ballot box. I saw large lines of people in big cities like Istanbul and Ankara lining up for hours to vote. That's impressive. And it shows that the people want to participate and do participate in their political system. So I think it's very commendable all around.
Absolutely. Thankfully, the way that the polls are organised here, people vote. Usually, their polling stations are at a local school, and my own experience differed from one of my colleagues yesterday. I was able to leave home, vote, and get back home again within half an hour. Another one of my friends at their polling station had to wait, as you say, in a queue for 45 minutes. Now, this shows both the organisation and the level of enthusiasm of people, which is wonderful. Now, you mentioned opinion polls, and this, I'm sure, is something which will be discussed at length over the coming times, and it's a topic which is associated with all elections. But the opinion polls ahead of these elections have shown wildly contradictory results, both an outright win for President Erdogan, an outright win for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. But the foreign press were particularly latched on to the probability, as they saw it, of a Kılıçdaroğlu win. Or why do you think it is that the West had particularly latched on to him?
Well, I mean, this is a complicated question. Why does the Western press? Yeah, I mean, I think there is that definite viewpoint that sometimes it's wishful thinking or a self-fulfilling prophecy where you keep thinking about it and it's going to come true. And then you are shocked to see the result. Well, I think it's more than just polls here. I think it's also a view of Turkey and its status in the world and its political system and its view of its leadership. And, you know, I don't think it's a secret to say that there are many pundits out there, and particularly in the New York Times, I always mention that, you know, I mean, I don't have it with me, but I think if I could reprise the New York Times today, I mean, they really flipped it around. I mean, for them, they wrote it kind of backwards. I mean, that in fact, you know, Erdogan sort of lost. I don't know if I'm paraphrasing it correctly, but on the contrary, I think he actually didn't win an outright victory, but he did get 49.5% of the vote and is about 5 points ahead of his opponent. So that is kind of, I think, impressive. But the Times really toned it down. And then they added in their article interviews with people on the street. And generally speaking, and there were some exceptions, they were talking to people who were very unhappy with the result and unhappy with the regime and administration. So it's kind of, journalism is how you write it up. It's all about perceptions. About the polls, the important thing about the polls to keep in mind, which we really don't talk about, is margin of error. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, if it says they're all, you know, neck and neck at X%, but then it's 3% margin of error, then that means they're really neck and neck. I mean, the numbers have to be scrutinized also. How do they do the poll? I mean, who do they ask? Generally, these polls, you're talking about millions and millions of voters, but usually the polls only question a few thousand voters. So it's done by mathematics, and sometimes the mathematics are off, sometimes the mathematics are on, but that's why they have the margin of error. So I think that, you know, polls are very instructive, but they don't tell the whole story. And clearly here, there was an idea in advance of how this was going to turn out. It didn't turn out that way.
Well, I'm sure you see the same thing in the United States, where polling is a much more lucrative science, I'm sure, in the United States. But polling, of course, depends very highly on the pool of people that you're asking about. If we look at the countrywide results for last night, different provinces have wildly different balances of votes between the two forerunners. We've seen neck and neck here in Istanbul and also in the capital Ankara, but we see 30-70 or 70-30, depending which candidates you're talking about, in other provinces. So I imagine that the modelling, the way that the opinion polls are modelled, is critical here.
Yeah, no question about that. I mean, certainly the big cities had a very, very different result than the rest of Turkey. I mean, you know, and that's where maybe the polls went wrong or didn't follow up sufficiently. I don't know what their random sampling was, how they came about it. Also, the other point, Andy, is turnout. Turnout's really important. For example, in terms of HDP and its support, yeah, well, there was a lower, I was looking at some of the numbers, of turnout in some of the Kurdish areas was much below what was anticipated. So it's turnout and also the location. It's a lot of different factors that are coming into play here as to why you have the result that you do.
Fascinating, and no doubt that's going to play very largely into the next 11, 12 days. I'm trying to get my head around the numbers here. 13 days, isn't it, until the runoff election on the 28th of May. My maths facilities have gone. the campaigning hasn't appeared to have really started yet. It's news today, just in the last few hours, that the second round is going to go ahead. So I'm sure both the alliances are still trying to work out how they're going to pitch their campaign and what they're going to focus on. But I imagine that the demographics of who voted in yesterday's election and who didn't vote is going to be key to winning on the 28th of May.
Well, that and also the 5% that Sinan Oğan received that
Certainly.
you show on your chart, that is crucial, because, you know, how that gets distributed. I mean, let's assume that, okay, it's all human nature, and you know, maybe people will change their votes. I mean, maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, look, the AK Party and MHP, and it's one other affiliated party, they have a majority in the parliament. And as we had discussed previously, one of the key elements of the Nations Alliance was, we're going to change the system. We're going to have a parliamentary system. We're going to have a prime minister again. We're going to diminish the power of the presidency. The other side, AK Party, People's Alliance, they have the system in place, the presidential system. Well, to change that system, you need to have a huge supermajority, I think, a supermajority of the 600 members of the parliament. And the Chairpe have with its allies and EE and the other parties, it doesn't even have a majority.
No.
The parliament has the majority is the People's Alliance. So now, how is that now going to go forward in terms of their argument? The other part of their argument or their policy was closer ties with the EU and closer ties with the West. If that's still what's left of their policy, is that sufficient to carry them further in terms of, now let's look at those 5%. Sinan Oğan is a nationalist. That's the term that's used for him, a nationalist candidate. What's the likelihood that the voters who voted for him, he left the MHP, he left the Nationalist Party. Now, he was in that fold, so probably, maybe, many of his voters are MHP, previous voters. Is the likelihood is that they're going to go for the Chairpe, for Kılıçdaroğlu in the runoff? I don't know. And even if you redistribute those 5% evenly, no, not that's mathematically going to happen, then President Erdogan will be over the 50% mark. So I think that 5% is really crucial, assuming that the votes pan out again similarly. Now, you also have the fact that it's a runoff. So sometimes people might stay home and might not vote. They voted, they went, as we talked about before, they ran to vote, they took it seriously. Are they going to do it again? I tend to think they will, because this is so important. I mean, this presidential election is so pivotal. I think you're going to see my elderly lady and the others walking up the steps and working hard to go and vote, to cast the vote, to show the seriousness of this for the future of the Turkish Republic. And I think this is really an existential and important election, and I think the Turkish people feel it. You see that the turnout at the rallies for the candidates was just extraordinary. So this is being taken seriously. They're going to turn out, and if the numbers pan out similarly, we haven't heard from Sinan Oğan in terms of what he's going to say about his voters. And of course, whatever he says is not a mandate. I mean, people can vote the way they want to vote. But is it likely that with the Nations Alliance, the coalition not having a majority, and the People's Alliance and Erdogan's party, AK Party, has the majority, is it likely that Turks are now going to vote for a different party, different candidate to take the presidency? I'm not a political psychologist, but I think that's a confusing arrangement, that maybe you already have a coalition that's in there, and now you have, and they don't necessarily agree on policy. That coalition doesn't agree on policy, only agrees on our one thing we want to do is to take out President Erdogan. And then you have a president, arguably, of the of a different party without a majority in parliament. I think getting the majority in parliament was pivotal for the AK Party and its allies. No question.
This is certainly throwing further question marks into the melting pot. Mark, I want to thank you for joining us today. Actually, you're the third person today to mention the psychology of election campaigns. So it will be interesting to see just how they do put things together. And no doubt we'll have the chance to talk about how things have developed and how the campaigning is going in a few days' time. It would be good to talk again before the elections to see how things are shaping up and how we can expect them to go. Thank you so much for joining us yet again here today, live from New York. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.